Hello and welcome back to the channel and back to my Developing 40k History series, in which I take a look at some of the wackier outcomes of early 40k. Now this one today has been spurred by a question asked by my significantly better half. She's currently reading the Horus Heresy and is getting into the lore behind 40k, and one of the questions she asked me was, why are there no female Space Marines? Now this is a topic which obviously has come up in the community quite a lot and generates many strong opinions, some very reasonable, others let's say less so. The issue of female Space Marines can lead to people talking a lot about the lore and a lot of not very nice gatekeeping opinions. For everybody with a reasonable explanation of why the Space Marine process just can't be applied to women, there's always somebody who's just there to say, oh, women shouldn't be in the lore, it's not allowed, they're not allowed to be Space Marines. But we like to be positive on this channel, so I'm not really going to be focusing on the gatekeepers. No, and I'm not actually even going to be focusing that much on lore, because to be quite honest, 40k lore, as we all know, is very malleable, and frankly, it doesn't hold much water here, because the fact is that there was a time when GW did quite explicitly produce female Space Marines. So, let's go all the way back to 1988, before anyone gets too angry about this, and look at what I'm talking about. So in 1988, Rogue Trader had been going for about a year, having launched in 1987. And there was an advert in White Dwarf for a new line of miniatures, the RT601 collection known as Adventurers. Now if you look closely at this, you will see that there are two female warriors. They are both wearing power armour and have backpacks that are remarkably similar to those used on the Space Marine sculpts. Female warrior Gabs and female warrior Jane. I should just say, before we move on to focus back on the female warriors and the existence of female Space Marines, that the RT601 set is an absolutely amazing collection of models that are a real testament to the designers who sculpted these and the really wild ability of lore back in the day of Rogue Trader. I mean, just look at some of these. You've got Punk, Mad Punk, so you have all your varieties of Punk, Old Pirate, Space Pirate, Squats in both miner and engineer form, and the perhaps less happily named Scum. Now all of these cool models were sculpted by Trish and Ali Morrison, Bob Naismith and Mark Copplestone, so give them a brief round of applause for their early designs for these Rogue Trader miniatures. But anyway, back to the female warriors. So there has been a lot of debate in the community, and these pictures you may have seen pop up now and again when people say, oh well, they're just proto-sisters of battle. I mean, after all, one has a power sword and the other one has a power sword and a bolter. Now, interestingly, these photos knocked around in the community from this for a very long time, until a few years ago, a man called Alan Merritt, who has, shall we say, some credentials with GW, popped up to give an explanation on the female Space Marine debate. I should say at this point that when we're talking about credentials, Alan Merritt's are utterly unimpeachable. I mean, this is a guy who was head of intellectual property at GW from 1980 to 2016. That's 36 years at the forefront of the materials that GW were producing. So let's just say he knows what he's talking about. So Alan was actually responding to a post in the excellent Old Hammer community Facebook group, where somebody posted a picture of female warriors Gabs and Jane and asked the question, were these ladies ever sold in blisters labelled as female Space Marines? Now, interestingly, the first response was, no they weren't, they were never sold, marketed or mentioned in the lore as female Space Marines, they were only ever female warriors in power armour. Alan Merritt popped up to shed some light on this with two comments. The first have noted that they were in fact sculpted explicitly as female Space Marines, saying, these were sculpted by the designer as female Space Marines, but it wasn't an official brief as such, and they weren't released as that. Back in the day, the process of making and releasing models was quite varied. Designers tried stuff and we asked them to make all manner of weird and wonderful things. Some of those things worked and became part of the fabric, and other things didn't work quite so well and were consigned to the dreaded, well, we'll only release this model if we have nothing else to release this month draw. Of course, those months turned up inevitably, and we eventually released nearly everything. My biggest fear, as design manager, was being forced to release some of those held back models, and so I named it Draw 101. Alan also helpfully clarified why there aren't female Space Marines in the lore today. In fact, why these female warrior Gabs and Jane sculpts didn't end up carrying on and being remade into plastic sculpts as the range developed. He said, "The reason there aren't female Space Marines has nothing to do with lore, or background or character of Marines. It's to do with simple logistics of making miniatures and selling miniatures. Early Citadel ranges had female versions of most character types. In fact, when we produced the C range, the intention was that upwards of 25% of the models would be female. But when we started selling the first fully formed C code, which was C01 Fighters, retailers kept complaining to us that customers weren't buying the female models, and could we not include any in their restocks. So, we took the female models out of circulation. I simply didn't include the moulds in the production cycle. It wasn't the only example, and we also pretty much stopped thoughts of doing massive ranges of female wizards, etc. This was in the early to mid 80s. Citadel customers at that time made it clear to us they weren't interested in buying female models. So when we got to the new Rogue Trader ranges and exciting new Space Marine model ranges, it was difficult to see how we could logistically add in an occasional female model to the mix. Blister packs had 3 Marines in them at the time, and the days of huge random mixes were long gone. And we knew that if every Marine blister had a female model as one of the 3 Marines, that folk would complain. So we didn't make any female ones, except for the very occasional ones that pop up from time to time. All the background fluff about why there are only male Marines is there to justify a commercial logistic issue. By the way, the success of the Plastic Marines RTB01 set also played a part. It never occurred to us to make any of those models female, and it certainly would have been possible to make it so there were 2 or 3 in the box. That set, to a large degree, defined what Marines were. So there we have it. Alan Merritt giving us an interesting insight into the process of making and designing miniatures back in the early days of Games Workshop. And that, I think, is a perfectly reasonable explanation of why there aren't female Space Marines. You can come up with all of the lore reasons you like for why they haven't been included in the hobby thus far, but the reality is that it was simply a commercial thing, a hangover of the attitudes of hobbyists back in the late 80s and early 90s. Thankfully, things have moved on a bit since then, and obviously while we don't have female Space Marines, and again, I don't want to get into the controversy over whether there should be or shouldn't be, but we are seeing a lot better representation, both across race and gender, in the Games Workshop lines. I mean, look at the Stormcast Eternals. They have a good selection of male and female characters, and we're also seeing that being brought across in 40k, and personally, look, you may disagree, but I think that's a good thing. A more diverse hobby means more players may relate to it, which means we get more new players in the hobby, which ultimately means we have more people to roll dice with, and that's always good for us. Anyway, that was a brief look at the history of why we don't have female Space Marines in the hobby. I'm going to do a few more of these videos on the history of the game and some of the early era of GW and 40k and Rogue Trader. If you are interested, please hit like and hit subscribe, because I want to make content that you guys want to listen to. Until next time then, I've been ADRWargaming, and happy hobbying.